Here's his concern. He's addressing a mostly white audience. And his point is, you white Americans, you talk about freeing slaves. Do you have any idea the depths of hatred in their soul for you? Slave owners were very creative. I don't want to get too graphic, but perhaps a little bit is in order here. There was one word, there was an adjective that no slave owner wanted to hear on his plantation. It was the kind of slave he worried about the most. And the adjective was uppity. You don't want an uppity slave. An uppity slave is a slave who's pissed off that he's a slave. And he wants to do something about it. And what might he do? Well, he might run away. And he might encourage others to run away. And that's a lot of money running away. If you're a slave owner, you don't want your slave property running away. Or even worse, he might turn on the owners themselves. So what do you do about this? Slave owners were very creative. One mechanism they used to solve this problem, you could take a slave and you could tie him to a tree, tie his hands and his legs around a tree, and if you had a chain of sufficient weight, you could hit him on the back and break his ribs. And what was convenient about that is, while it's terrible pain and they would scream in horror, broken ribs, you can still go out and work. You can still move your arms and legs around. And the benefit of that is all the other slaves would hear the screaming. An even better method would be to hog tie a slave and burn him with branding irons. That gets the double benefit of the screams that everyone hears, but you also get the odor of burning flesh drifting through the plantation. And all the other slaves smell that and hear it and experience it, and they think to themselves, I don't want to be that guy. I'm just going to shut up and do my work. It got even worse. There was a phenomenon in America called mulattoes. You know what mulattoes are? I ask students sometimes, what's a mulatto? They're scared to talk about it. Well, a mulatto is someone of mixed parentage. They have one black parent, one white parent. And there were almost 1 million mulattoes on the eve of the Civil War in America. And Lincoln found this. He scratched into the Southern sense of honor, which ran deep. They prided themselves on their chivalrous treatment of each other, and especially their women. And Lincoln raised the question, these mulattoes, where do they come from? There aren't many mulattoes in Massachusetts, or in Pennsylvania, or in Illinois. Why is it all the mulattoes are in Mississippi, and Alabama, and Virginia? You know where mulattoes came from? It didn't come from black men and white women having children. That's not what it is. They came from white slave owners sneaking into their slave quarters and raping their slave women in the middle of the night. That's where you got mulattoes. And the South knew this, and they hated Lincoln for bringing this up over and over and over again. Imagine, what was that like for slave women? I don't know. I can't conceive of that horror. What was that like for the men? That woman has a husband, a son, a brother right there. And they hear the door creaking open. And they know what's coming. And what do you do about it? You don't do a damn thing. Because if you say anything at all, you might have a shovel taken to your head. Or even worse, tomorrow the slave owner might sell off your wife, or your mother, or your sister, or whoever it is, and you might not ever see her again. So you shut up and you take it. And Jefferson's point is, what kind of hatred does that burn into the human soul? Can we really imagine that depth? Whatever that is it conceivable that if we can free all the slaves instantly, is it conceivable that some number, maybe just a few, will use their new freedom to seek revenge on their former owners? Is that crazy to think that? And the minute some number of blacks start to sneak into the homes of whites and slit white throats in the middle of the night, what will be the response of the white community? By sheer number, the whites will crush the blacks out of existence. This is what Jefferson's predicting right here, a race war. There will be a race war, and it will be short and swift, and it will result in the elimination of the black race from the North American continent. And then he raises this question, is that justice? That's not justice. That's a nightmare. So if our choice is that versus free the slaves and send them away and wish them the best of luck and let them establish their own regime somewhere, that seems much more humane if those are your options. Now, was Jefferson crazy in thinking this? Well, the good news is we have not had a genocidal race war in America. That's the good news. The bad news is, well, just ask yourself, has race been a problem in America? I mean, good grief, people, it's 2011. And there are lots of Americans who still struggle with that subject today. Today, for different reasons. But today, we can't get past the color of skin. So, no, Jefferson wasn't crazy to think it's going to be really hard for human beings to look at each other simply as fellow human beings, fellow citizens, and potential friends, and not think about the color of skin. Yeah.
Was there any controversy back in Jefferson's day about his use of the word created?
Tell me more what you're thinking.
I'm thinking, when is a person a person?
Well, basically there's an argument. Chuck, have you been through the leadership program in the Rockies?
No.
You should sign up, because one of the things we do is we actually walk through the whole argument of the Declaration of Independence. And it has an intellectual pedigree that runs back about 2,000 years, 2,500 years. But I'll say this. The Declaration of Independence, the whole premise is this idea that there is truth in the universe that is not created by us, but discovered by us. It's out there. Truth is something to be discovered, and we don't manufacture it, including the truth about ourselves. We didn't design ourselves. We didn't choose to make us free, rational creatures with natural rights. We find ourselves that way. We discover ourselves to be that way. And so the Declaration leaves it very ambiguous. Who did create us? It recognizes a creator. And that's it. It doesn't put a name on it. It doesn't put a label on it. It just says a creator, pointing to something higher than mere human will as the source of truth. Other questions, thoughts? Yes, sir.
Stepping back a little bit to your initial premise and entree of this conversation.
Yeah.
First of all, ideologically, I want 100% with so I want to offer, though, that the issue at hand today, in terms of the challenge on the Constitution, I'm just going to make a comment and ask you to comment.
Okay.
It's more an issue intellectually about the nature and the depth of historical revisionism and the inability of us today to look back on the past with an empathetic eye and instead put our own values on the past. And that's where we get these twisted concepts of what happened back then and the right and wrong of that. And that's more the issue that might be challenging the Constitution, that might be challenging a number of other pieces, the atomic bomb, there's all kinds of different areas of academic inquiry that kind of suffer through this problem. This is resulting in a current potential intellectual challenge on the Constitution. It's really the inability of us as a people to look back on history with a fair and principled eye rather than a moralistic interpretation based on what currently is.
Great point. And I respond this way. Every time I do a lot of speaking and public debating about this subject, and very often, and again, just as a reminder, this is one criticism of the Constitution, that it's immoral and racist, that I'm trying to address. There are other important criticisms of the Constitution as well. But whenever an intelligent mind says, well, they were a bunch of racist bigots, and I'll walk out this argument, and they'll say, okay, sometimes they'll start to backpedal. So they'll say, well, they did the best they could do given their limited 18th century sort of bigoted way of looking at the world. I don't ever let go of that. I say, I was in a debate here several years back in Los Angeles, and I said, look, you, Mr. Fancy Pants, academic, PhD, you take your modern morality today, your progressive morality, and you set your butt down in that convention in 1787, and you look at Georgia in the eye, and Georgia's saying, I want to count all of our slaves so that we'll have a lot more representatives and we'll dominate the national legislature, or we leave. How do you respond to that? And don't give me this talk about, well, they did the best they could do for their... You're this progressive, modern intellectual. How do you respond to that? I am content to stand with the judgments of Lincoln and Fred Douglass on this, that they did exactly the right thing. I don't think there's a better solution. And part of what I'm trying to show is what happened in America from 1776 and the next 7 years. It's a very short period of time compared to the fact that slavery's been around for thousands of years. In that short window of time, America was the greatest anti-slavery movement ever in human history. And if someone wants to say, well, they shouldn't have taken 87 years, they should have done it instantly, I say you're living in that's a pipe dream. That's impossible. 87 years compared to thousands, pretty damn good. Okay. Yeah.
My question is, under the time of Congress, you said that the northwestern United States was the law passed and including slavery.
Correct. The Northwest Ordinance. First it was done, and then it was repassed by the very first Congress under the Constitution. Well, it was a piece of territory. There's a difference between, well, and East and West. The point is, it's a territory, not a state. The federal government had no authority under the Constitution over slavery in states. So in South Carolina, Congress had no authority to do anything about slavery in South Carolina. The only way to get rid of slavery in South Carolina is for the people and the government of South Carolina to get rid of it. But this was a federally owned territory.
My question was, what about the area really west of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina?
Yeah, and north of the Ohio River.
The rest of the southern states. Was that precluded because southern states wouldn't allow it, or didn't own it?
Well, that was all owned by.
In Georgia, there was a big area that's now Mississippi and Alabama. What about that area?
Well, I've got the answer for you. It's in a great book titled Vindicating Lincoln, written by a guy named Krannawitter. And you should rush out and purchase a copy as soon as possible. But the short answer is the Missouri Compromise. After the Louisiana Purchase, we find ourselves in possession of this massive tract of land. And this becomes the thorniest problem. Should slavery be allowed to spread out into that territory or not? As long as it's territories, Congress does have the ability to legislate these things.
You're missing my question.
Okay.
My question is that Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina and Virginia didn't extend all the way to the Mississippi River.
No, right.
So wasn't that part of the territory that we control in addition to the Northwest Territory? Was there...
No, we didn't know.
The area between the Mississippi and the
Spain had some of that, France had some of that.
Map
talking about Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee and Kentucky. Now, those areas, what about those territories?
I think the states were bigger in size, and the land that went west of the states belonged to other nations at the time. I think there was an assistance.
Well, I think, in fact, most of what became the Northwest Territory originally was owned by Virginia. And Virginia ceded that, basically gave it to the Union. And many of the western borders of those states were extended much larger than what you see right now. And if you went out far enough, it was owned either by the French or by the Spanish. So as long as it was within the state territory, it was governed by the the state boundary by the state laws.